The Seahawks are hiring Saints offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak as their new offensive coordinator. Kubiak served as the OC, he was a quarterback coach in New Orleans for a long time. Now, Coach, I know you have some history with Klint Kubiak. Obviously, he comes from the Kubiak coaching family. But what are your thoughts of this hire, and break down the truth of this hire? Go ahead.
That's a joke. He's 30. He played in 05 at Colorado State. He played for a bunch of buddies of mine. My boys all coached him. He was a slapdick then. He's a slapdick now. I think he's from right there in Denver. Of course, with his dad being in Denver for most of his life. Gary. It's a nepotism hire, man. It's a nepotism hire. It is what it is. But he's a slapdick. I don't believe players like him. I don't believe they respect the guy. His dad has kind of burned some bridges as well. I think the kids is following the same footsteps. I like Gary. I always did for what he did when he came back as a backup to Elway from that time on, even as a coach. But then I think he burned a lot of bridges. The son is doing the same thing. He's a wet behind the ear, handed everything to him. He hasn't really done a lot to earn shit. And he keeps getting these big-time jobs because of who he is and what his daddy did. I'm glad he's not going to with Pete Carroll. That's all I can tell you. I'm glad he's not going to Seattle when Pete was there. That's all I can say. Go ahead and have him. That's your team, Bailey, but I think the head coach in Seattle is a I'm not high on him, and I'm not high on this cat. What has he done? What has he done? What's on his resume that he's fucking shown you that he's done? Derek Carr, what did he do with him? Another shitbird. What has he done with anybody?
He coached Russell Wilson in Denver. Like I don't. That's why I wanted to ask you about this, because when I saw this hire for the Seahawks, I was a little concerned. I also was concerned at who they were interviewing, because it looked like at one point they were going to go back to having co-offensive coordinators, which, if you remember, in Seattle didn't start off great, didn't end well. So I was a little concerned by that. And I got to ask you, we've discussed Mike McDonald and the Seahawks on this show previously, probably about a year ago. And fast forward a year later, I think all of our predictions about that division ended up being true. I got to ask you, is there any glimmer of hope for Seahawks fans after them hiring Klint Kubiak? I mean, they fired offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb after one season, after hiring him from the University of Washington. Obviously had all this success with Michael Penix and the Washington Huskies, leading them to the national championships. Their offensive coordinator, they fired him after a year, which I was like, that's a kind of a shocker to me. And then they hired Klint Kubiak after interviewing a bunch of different people. So what are your thoughts, and any glimmer of hope for Seahawks fans?
Nah, fucking DEI hire. Here's the thing. A good friend of mine coached him in Colorado State. He was OC, buddy named Coach Hammerschmidt. He was there with Sonny Lubick, who the stadium's named after in Colorado State. He was a legend there. That's who he played for. And I had a bunch of friends on that staff. I'm telling you, he hasn't done shit. As a player, as a coach, he ain't done shit. There's no hope. You guys are fucked. Here's why. You got a defensive coordinator who's kind of young in his own right, very young as a head coach. Great players around him in Baltimore. Didn't have to do fucking a lot. Not like he built the defense from inside out. He attained the defensive personnel and basically called the same defense that Wink and other guys had ran before him in Baltimore. And then you go and get an inexperienced OC after you fired an experienced one after just a year. You go get this guy because guess what? You know his daddy. And again, this is the problem. This is why we're going to have you could have a 2, maybe 3 and done up in Seattle, man, after this year. Plus, when he takes the job, he removes Pete Carroll's shit. He changes the offense around, doesn't want to have anything to do with Legion of Boom, all this shit. You don't think that gets around to the players, and players that know or go on Richard Sherman's podcast say, hey, we fucking took your shit all down. You don't think that shit matters when people start talking? All these OGs talk to these younger players. Right. I'm telling you, there's a problem in Seattle now, man. I don't like it because I still like the Seahawks because of Pete. And I've always kind of was a Seahawks fan after the Rams in the West, all the way back to the Dave Craig days. So Kurt Warner days, the running back Kurt Warner. I don't see it, man. I see a struggle right here going on.
Yeah, and I mean, we discussed the gutting of the VMAX, so to speak, the Virginia Mason Athletic Center where the Seahawks practice out in Renton. And when Mike Macdonald was hired, he did remove a lot of the legendary artifacts, of the Seahawks glory days with Pete and Marshawn and all those Super Bowl runs and great defenses they had. And everyone was like, "Oh, it's bullshit. It's nothing." I don't know if that's nothing, because I think, especially, me as somebody who grew up in that state, somebody who watched that team, that's a little alarming. So I can only imagine from a player's perspective, players who've been there a long time, because I know Pete Carroll kept a lot of those players in Seattle for a long time from those Super Bowl runs. I wonder how they felt. That's kind of the thing I would raise with this. And now you mentioned, they fired Grubb, who's an older coach. They go and hire Kubiak. Oof. Going to be interesting. You think Mike Macdonald's done after this season in Seattle?
1, 2, or 3. He might get a third year, but who knows? It depends. And if they lose Metcalf and they lose – because I like Geno a lot, but to be honest, let's be honest, Geno was a backup for a reason for most of his career.
Yeah.
I like him, though. I think he's very accurate, got a big arm, all that shit, but he turns the ball over too much in very, very critical situations. He's not a big game quarterback. I can see that being another new dumpster fire, and starting all over there too, just like the Raiders are about to do right now with Pete. I can see that happening there, and them going after another coach in a year or so.
Yeah, and yikes is all I'll say, because if Seattle's tanking and the Raiders are tanking, I have a lot more confidence that the Raiders are going to turn it around quick versus Seattle. I already saw Pete turn around Seattle once, so
no doubt.